welcome to the video on my Glaze Lab. This is the second in a two-part series. If you're an experienced glazer, if you've been mixing glazes for a long time, this is probably not the video for you. There are a few nuggets in here, especially about keeping notes and record keeping, and if you're looking at those, you might find that helpful. And I outlined those in an earlier video about shrinkage. If you're a beginner and you're interested in pottery and you're interested in pottery making, but you've only been using prepared glazes that you're buying at, between 15 and 30 bucks a pint from the local supplier, this is for you. This is my big concern in looking at young potters coming up, and including potters in my family that are just using prepared glazes and buying it by, the 50-pound bag. And so I'm really interested in getting this technology into your hands. That being said, this is an incredibly boring video. It's long, it's tedious, and I try and make it as interesting as I can by putting some nuggets in there on different things, but this is not a nail biter by any stretch of the imagination. But I do recommend you sit all the way through it. Watch the whole thing, because, and maybe even do it twice, because you'll pick up information that goes along. I think this video is important, and that's why I'm doing it. Other people are doing similar stuff, and they're doing it much better than me. And I reference Sue McLeod on Instagram. Go look her up, glazy.org, and et cetera, et cetera. Fantastic stuff. And I say it a couple of times. I'm a big fan of Sue McLeod, and she's doing glaze work so much better than I am. But I'm doing this because I have some audience, and I think it's really important for you folks to get out there and try and get off the hook of the prepared glazes. And a lot of the prepared glazes out there are published. So if you're using glazes that are very expensive, you can find glazes that match them identically, and they're published, and you can start producing that stuff much, much more reasonably. In contrast, $25 a pound to $1.75 a pound for dry materials. So take a look at this. If you've made it this far, please like and subscribe. I can really use that. I'm really trying to build a channel to a certain extent, and it's not about money or anything else for me. It's just about getting the information out and keeping my interest in it. So please enjoy this video, and like and subscribe if you feel like I'm giving you anything of any quality. Feel free to skip ahead too. I mean, I'm going to try and cut some things out and get all the ums and the ahs out of it, but I'm working in my little tiny studios. It's the first morning in Arizona where it's been less than 104 degrees during the day, so I'm working in a little area where I have air conditioning, and it looks terrible. And this is an ugly video, so be prepared for that, but I think the information is good, and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks much. Okay, so here's my Glaze Lab, and I have a really small studio. We're really packed up right now, so I'm really working hard in the studio. Got lots of projects going. But I've got one of those inexpensive, cheap little particle board shelving units that's located on right next to the garage door. And so I've been able to sequester shelves to hold my materials, and also hold box trays full of experiments that are going on, current experiments. And then at the very bottom two shelves, I can have bags of materials that are extra, too big to put inside the tubs. But if you'll notice, we're starting with the 1-pounders on the top because the labels are facing forward, and I can see what's in them, see how much is in them, and I can easily pull them down. Anything that isn't in the 1-pounders is going to be in the 5-pounders, and the 5-pounders are somewhat redundant, but mostly for the bulk materials that you would use, the clays and the talcs and the dolomite, wollastonite, that kind of stuff, silica, feldspars, and so I have easy access. Okay, so let's go over the stuff we have on the table here. What we have over here are 4 of my guitar slides. We're using those as test tiles. Roll of toilet paper. Toilet paper is great, better than paper towels. Allows you to get in and muck things out. In between batches, you might have iron oxide or something in here. Wipe it out so you don't contaminate your next run of glaze tests. A little underglaze with a fine brush to label our test tiles with. We have a razor blade and a piece of tile here. You could probably do it on the top of this if you wanted to. but we're going to chop up a gram into quarters, so you can work with a quarter of a gram. That's one way of doing that. If your scale doesn't get down to breaking up a gram, we got a magic marker for labeling our little containers, and we have glaze containers with lids, rubber spatula, 2 containers. We have a small one that we're going to put on top of our scale and be able to put our powders and chemicals into, and then we're going to have a larger one we can dump into that and keep using this one over and over again, and then we can use this for mixing. I have a bucket with water in it. I have a Joy bottle that's clean with water in it, and which is nice for being able to open it up and deliver certain amounts of water into little containers. This is what we're going to be using for mixing today. This is another option other than, if you looked in my last video, we had a blender idea, which is great. With a standard Oster blender, you can hook the bottom propeller onto a standard jar. It's worth going and looking at. If you haven't seen that video yet, I'd advise going and looking at it. And then we have this, which is a rubber bowl for mixing alginate in a dental office, and we're not going to use that one today because most people don't have that available to them, but old yogurt containers are around. You can buy these Walmart probably for 12-15 bucks. They're not an expensive item, and they'll last a while. They've got a little bearing inside here that is going to give up the ghost eventually, but you know, I've seen them go for years in studios and keep going. We have a spoon for dishing out materials and putting them into our containers, and a pencil. We only write in pencil. If you haven't gone and seen my video on note taking, I would recommend going and doing that now. It's or shortly after this video. You'll understand what's happening here. I shot this a couple of times and botched it, so I filled out most everything here, but we're going to go over that in a minute. And the other thing we have are our chemicals. We have them mostly in order, the order that we're going to be using them, and they're up here on the table, and we'll look at those. We have the small containers, which are my 1-pounders, and these are great for being able to pull them off. Like I say, I use my shelving system like a library. I pulled all these off, I've set them here, I'm ready to use them, and when I'm done with them, if I move on to my next glaze, the constituents that are here that are not in the next glaze will go back on the table and new ones will come off, and I'll be able to transfer off and on like that and work in a relatively small space. I'm doing all my glaze work here on a coffee table, card table, so that's a pretty reasonable amount of space to be working in. So hygiene is important. I recommend using at least an N95 dust mask, and try and get a better respirator at some point, so that when you're mixing glazes, you don't have any creep by it. Because I don't really trust those little face masks, but they're better than nothing. Today, what we're mixing is a Majolica glaze. It's the Majolica glaze that I've been using for making my guitar slides. I'll take this up so you can maybe see it. It's fun. They're colorful and they take brush strokes well, and they're kind of neat. But what we're working with here is a sintered glaze. I can take this recipe, and at 05 I can center it on there, and now it's baked on. It's not moving anywhere. The hope is that, and why I'm using this in this video, is that in the next few videos I'm going to be playing with a light exposed silkscreen medium that I've purchased. I'm going to try and make underglaze stencils to put on these, but I want to put them on glaze. I don't want to put them under glaze. So I can now get this completely wet, and it's just fine. And now that it's wet, I should be able to put an underglaze stencil on there and peel it off on glaze instead of under glaze, which means that it can go on the glaze, and I don't have to put it on bisqueware, distort the greenware. I don't have to distort the greenware, and I don't have to put a clear glaze over the top of that. So that's kind of interesting, and if you want to go along for that ride, that's kind of fun. But the Majolica is a lot of fun. If you haven't played with it, it's interesting because you get some really pretty fine detail and lots of fun stuff to play with Majolica. And this glaze came from University of Montana, And it's a Cone 6 Majolica glaze. I have a reference here to 520122 because I was playing with this in 2022. And in all reality, I have another reference for Roy and Hesselberth, I think. Understanding Cone 6 Glazes was a book that I was looking at in 04. So I have another reference here to 530104, which is a page that I was playing with that glaze. And looking at the two recipes, there's such a small amount of difference between the two that I believe they're probably, for all intents and purposes, identical. What this glaze contains and what you'll need to mix this glaze if you want to try this glaze is Frit 3124, nepheline cyanite, silica. I use 325 mesh because that's what I like. EPK whiting, Ultrox, which is a white opacifier that replaces tin oxide, which is very expensive, and Zircopax, which is, in my opinion, is no longer available. And then there's bentonite, which is a very inexpensive clay. So let's start looking at mixing this and see if there's if we can get through this video without having too many accidents. On that note, I just felt my phone buzz. I'm going to shut my phone off. It's something that I do when I work on glaze. One of the reasons I'm doing this is I botched a load here. I'm talking and I'm mixing stuff up and I forgot where I was and I wasn't obeying my own rules because I'm doing too many things at one time. So if you're mixing glazes, and especially if you're mixing a big 5-gallon drum or bucket of glaze and you've got 70 or 80 bucks in there in materials and cobalt or whatever, you don't want to not have track of what you're doing, answering the phone and come back and go, gee, where was I? How much of this have I added? So my method here tries to eliminate that as much as possible. But you're going to have to develop that system for yourself. You can use mine, but you're going to have to develop a system for yourself so you don't get lost and lose track. And one of the things I do is I make check marks. I have a line of check marks here that I can erase, and as I go through, I've got my check marks, so I know that I've already been there. So we're going to start with 3124. It asks for 24 grams. Now, for those of you that have been mystified by working with glazes and mixing your own glazes, I really recommend that you pick a glaze like this one. You now have the recipe for this one. Pick a glaze like this, something that you can see a picture of that interests you. Buy the constituents in the 1 pound lots for putting that glaze together and try that glaze and see how it goes. This is like cooking cake or anything else. You've got ingredients. It's not eggs and flowers, it's Frit 3124 and EPK, but you're mixing certain amounts, you're mixing them together in a certain way, and you're baking them in an oven, the kiln. It's really not rocket science. It gets to be rocket science once you get into molecular weights and theories and all that other stuff, but that's handled mostly by computers these days. So you got all the benefits of the world to be able to do this. So we're going to take this scale, and this will give you an idea of what it's like working with these cheapy scales. And you can do it. It's it's kind of a pain in the neck, but you can do it, and you can be successful with a small little inexpensive scale like this. We're going to turn it on, and it's going to come up in ounces. And so now we want to get out of ounces, so I'm going to press the unit, and that's going to take me to different gradients. So now we're on grams, and so I'm going to put my tub on here and weigh my tub, and my tub comes in at 22 grams. So I'm going to mark 22 grams on there, which is what I've done, and that lets me know what this weighs in case I lose zeroing. This thing times out constantly, so you got to keep working with it or it shuts itself down and then you have to go all over again. So now I'm going to press the little ZT button, which is zero it out, and now it's to zero, so it's ignoring the weight of this, and I can discount that weight in my overall calculation. So we're going to put 24 grams of Frit 3124 in the container. 14, 19, 18, 23, yeah, 24. The reason I tap that is you know, you're dealing with a half a gram here and there, and that's not that big of a deal. It's not gonna mess you up. But these little scales are funky that way. So there we are. Now we're back, and now I'm going to take this and I'm going to set it off behind my other materials so that I don't get into it again. And I'm going to go here and I'm going to check off Frit 3124. Okay, my next ingredient is nepheline cyanite, so I bring the nepheline cyanite down, and it's 23 grams. Now if you're working on a triple beam balance, you would have to set the balance for your scale, gram scale every time. That's the thing about that, is you got to dial it in. If you used one in school, it might be a little easier for you. They're not complicated either. Okay, 23 grams of nepheline cyanide. Taking the nepheline cyanide and I'm moving it out behind my materials. I'm checking it off and I'm putting it in the tub. Okay, next one is silica, 325. It's 20.2 grams, but the fact of the matter is we're just going to go with 20 grams. That 0.2 is negligible at these weights, so we're going to put 20 grams of silica in there. Okay, that's 20 grams of 21. That's 21. We'll back one off a little bit. There we go. 20 grams of silica 325. Put the lid back on, set it off to the back, check it off, add it. Okay, our next is EPK. So we need 17 grams of Edgar plastic kale in here. There we go, 17 grams of EPK. Check it off, put it in the tub. You want to make sure that you don't have any powder left inside here, because that affects your next, you're weighing it again. You should be able to tell pretty easily by looking at your register on the scale to see if there's any additional weight to it, but you don't want to mess up the next weight. Okay, so whiting is our next one. We are into 14 grams of whiting. There we go. I'm going to set the whiting off to the side, back behind everything. We're going to check off the whiting, and we're going to throw the whiting into the container. Now, the next item up is bentonite. Bentonite is something to consider when you're working with it. Bentonite is something that you do not want to mix in your glazes when you're doing an overall glaze like this. You don't want to throw it into the water or the wet glaze. You don't want to throw it into a bucket of already mixed glaze because you've forgotten it. What you want to do is add the bentonite to it. Now, 8% bentonite, that's a lot of bentonite. And one of the reasons that's that way in this glaze is, one is it's adding clay. There's not a lot of clay in here except for the EPK. So it's adding clay, which is a binder, into the glaze. And also you've got a fair amount of stuff that wants to sink to the bottom in this glaze, like Frit 3124 and silica, and even the Nef Sci for that matter, all kind of want to migrate to the bottom. This glaze stays in suspension really well for a really long period of time, and the reason that is because it's got 8% bentonite in it. And bentonite is cheap, and it's good for swelling up in a glaze and holding all those particles in suspension that want to sink to the bottom and form concrete in the bottom of your bucket. There we go, 8 grams of bentonite. Now, the trick with bentonite is to add it to your dry materials and then check it off, and then stir it up and get it mixed in with those materials so that all those little grains of bentonite are suspended and separated from each other by the other powders that are in the batch. So here's a thing for me that I like to do when I mix a glaze like this. Let's just say this is a first glaze and you haven't gotten to the point where you're going to be adding colorants to it. I want to know what this glaze looks like and behaves like without the colorants. So the first test we're going to do is 510124. And what I've noted here is we're doing the above glaze without Ultrox. We're doing it clear. And we're going to see what it looks like on a test tile absolutely clear. Now the benefits of that, doing that clear, is that in the future, you can make other glazes with other colors out of the same base glaze as this, and they're going to marry really well with this glaze because they're basically the same glaze. So that's a bargain. Any glaze that you have, you want to kind of see what it's going to do clear. Now the way to mix a glaze like this, I'm going to put this back in the other container because we're going to mix it in this large cottage cheese container. But we don't want to put it in there dry. We want some water in the bottom of the container. And the reason for that is if it's completely dry on the bottom, and you put the water on the top, you're going to get a cake of dried glaze ingredients on the bottom that's really hard to break up, really hard to stir into the mix. If you put this on top of the wet stuff here, on top of this water, now the bottom of it is wet. And when you stir it up, you'll have an opportunity to get it all mixed up. You're going to have to continue to add water to it. You want to do that gingerly. You don't want to just start adding water to it willy-nilly because there's no backing off. You want to try and get it to the thickness you want. And the thickness I work at with testing like this is about the consistency of melted ice cream. That's the old rule of thumb that you want glaze. Now, if you want to know exactly how the thickness of your brew is affecting the finished product, then you're going to have to get into specific gravities and the density of the glaze with the amount of moisture that's in it. And again, I recommend Sue McLeod on Instagram for that. Sue McLeod Ceramics, because she's got how to build meters. You know, if you want a meter that you can measure the amount of moisture and the density, get specific gravity. She's going to explain to you what happens with different gravities in different bodies and in different glazes, and it's really concise. It's really worthwhile. Her stuff is just great. I'm just really a fan of her. So we're still a little thick. I'm going to add a little bit more water before I stir this up with our machine here. This has 2 speeds. I'm going slow at first. I might speed it up a little bit. But you want to make sure you get all that stuff off the bottom. It's nice if your container is flat, because then it works better with the blade. Take a look at that. Now, one of the things that happens with bentonite is bentonite puffs up, man. It gets, in just a minute or two, it starts swelling up and thickening up the glaze, which is what you want it to do. That's how it holds it in suspension. Yeah, that's still a little thick, and I think I'm going to fight that for a while with the bentonite. But anyway, we'll pour it in here. And we'll take our first test tile and we will write our first number on there, which is 50 for the page, 01 for the test on that page, and 24 for this year. 50, 01, 24. like so. So I'm not going to do a fancy dip. I just like a little 5-second dip. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Shake it off. This stuff dries real fast. That's the nice thing about doing guitar slides with this, is I dip it with a all the way down, and then with a grabber, and then I can just flip it up and grab it because it's almost dry enough to grab now. Not a lot of glazes do that. Now I'm going to give it a second dip just down off the rim real quick, just to see what 2 coats look like. See what it looks like when it's extra thick. Okay, there it is. There it is, finished with the number on there, 2 coats, 2 dips, clear. We know what that, we'll set that off to the side here, and we'll move on to our next test. So the next test is what it looks like with the opacifier, which is Ultrox. Ultrox, which has replaced tin oxide. Tin has some other behaviors which are rather interesting. And Ultrox, which has replaced Zircopax, basically zirconium, which is an opacifier. It doesn't really opacify. What it does is reflect light back. But sets up jillions of little mineral mirrors in your glaze and reflects the white light back. So Ultrox is expensive, and so something you might consider doing in the future, and I have done it, and I'm not going to share those results with you in this video, but I have done it, is run a spectrum on it. So what you would do is you would start with this, and you would add, you're going to 16 grams of Ultrox. So you'd go in 2 gram, maybe go in 2 gram increments. Add 2 grams, assign it a number, do a tile. Add 2 more grams to the same batch, assign it a number, do a tile. Go all the way to 16, which means you'd have 8 tests. And see, especially on a white clay body, to see what how opaque it was, what the reaction of the glaze was against the clay body with each of those. And if you could get this down to 8% Ultrox, then you've just saved 50% of your Ultrox. And that's worth trying out. And you might like the effects better, so who knows. So we're going to put 16 grams of Ultrox in here. Now you're going to see, here's the pain in the neck with this thing. We're going to have to redo the entire deal because it's timed out. And there we go. All right, so we need 16 grams of Ultrox. And the reason it's got 16 grams of Ultrox is this is a really white glaze. And this is cone 6, right? So cone 5, 6, I prefer cone 6. Most Majolica is happening around cone 04. A lot of it's on terracotta. And the terracotta is semi-vitreous at that temperature. Not really, but that's what they want you to believe. If you're trying to do Majolica and you want to do Majolica on something that's more utilitarian, like you don't want it to freeze outdoors, or you want it to be a mug that isn't going to burn your fingers when you stick it in the microwave kind of thing, then cone 6 is a much better way to go. It's not the end of the world in, it's not cone 11 reduction or cone 9 or cone 10 reduction, but it's better than 04. But we're going to take our little rubber spatula and we're going to take everything down off the sides of this, because we really want to get that Ultrox mixed thoroughly in there. So let's add the Opax into our mix here. Five grams of Opax. And let's stir it up. Ultrox, not Opax. And I'm going to give it some extra time. And the reason I'm going to do that is I want to get that opacifier thoroughly mixed through all that glaze. I don't want any little goobers either. I want solid glaze, not with any little dry pockets. You notice this thing cleans up pretty fast, so it's a pretty good option for doing this. I'm going to throw this in here. And I'm going to mark, put the labeling on the side. Where did I put my, there it is. My labeling on the side of 50, I don't know why I'm transposing that so much. 50, 02, 24. And dip that in there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pull it out. Shake it. Let it dry. Give it a little second dip. Okay. And set that off to the side. Okay, so one of the things I really like to do is I like to do something special kind of at the end of a glaze test. Now, I may not always do it because I may have something in mind for this glaze test. I may want to do some more experimentations with it. I may want to fiddle around with it on some different clay bodies and do some stuff like that. So I don't do it every time, but very often I'll run a little experiment for myself at the very end and just throw something in there and see what it's going to do. So, you know, like I could add cobalt to this and see if I get a really nice blue out of it, or something along those lines. So what I'm going to do, well, I'm going to go real crazy, and I'm going to add 5 grams of red iron oxide to see what happens. And then I'm going to add 2 grams of iron filings, those little things that you used to find when you were a kid with a magnet out in the yard when you're digging in the ground. And we have a lot of it around here. It's called black sand in the gold world. Come on. There we go. We're getting there. Let's go to Graham. There we are. Okay, so we're going to add 5 grams of red iron oxide. And what we should get with that is a brown glaze. You know, brown and white. We'll see. Might be a total dud. Who knows? Might be too much iron oxide. We'll throw the iron oxide in there. Mix that up. Set the iron oxide off to the side. Check the iron oxide that we've done it. And mix it up. Now again, with my colorants, I'm going to spend a little bit more time chewing on it. And I'm also adding more powder to it, so it might need a little bit more water. I want it to be about the consistency of melted ice cream. But you got to be really judicious with your water. There is not a lot of going back once you add too much water to it. And I say that, but if you have clay in it, which we have clay in this. If you make a liquor of Epsom salts, you add Epsom salts to water until it won't take the Epsom salts anymore. Put it in a bottle with an eyedropper. You can add a couple of drops of that, and you'll be amazed at how it thickens stuff up. Okay. Yeah, I want some more. I don't think that's enough. And I think I need a little bit more water to it. It's looking really thick. And again, we've been out long enough with that bentonite that the bentonite's starting to thicken up too. Just leave that in the bucket. Okay. Yeah, see, that is pretty thick stuff. That is pretty thick stuff. Bentonite's pretty amazing. I pretty much add it to everything I make. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so this is 05. Nope, 50. I see. I keep wanting to do that. It's my brain. My bad. 5003. 24. And we're ready to dip. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Shake it up. And a second little dip, just for thickness. So there used to be stuff, and there still is stuff. Granular ilmenite was something you would add to a clay body to get speckles. I'm not sure what the mineral is that we're adding here to this. Could be hematite, could be all sorts of different stuff that's in my wash locally, which is where I'm getting this iron oxide. I mean these iron filings. So we'll find out. But at any rate, it's an iron-bearing mineral, and because it's so much heavier than everything else. And we're going to add 2 grams. Oops, and we added 3. There we go, 2 grams. So with this, I'm going to show you how to cut a gram in half here, or actually into quarters if you wanted to. So I'm going to take my little tile, and I'm going to make sure it's clean, and I'm going to dump my materials in a pile in the center, and I'm going to try and break that into a nice even deal, and then I'm going to cut it in half and move either side so that they're equal sides. It's kind of like trying to divide up dinner with your wife. So now we have there's 2 grams there. Now if you wanted a half a gram, you could take that and cut that into halves, and now you've got a half a gram. Right? If you wanted a quarter of a gram, you can just keep going. And then that amount of material is what you add to your recipe. And that's a fairly reasonable way at this scale of what you're doing to get smaller amounts of grams without having a gram scale that's going to do it, right? So you can just chop it up and move it around. And so, like I say, sometimes when you're working with cobalt or you're doing a run, you want to see what's going to happen, or you're adding cobalt and titanium or some other thing together, and it calls for very small amounts of cobalt or your coloring oxide, and you're working in these 100-gram batches. Sometimes you're going to have to get down to a quarter, a half, or an eighth of a gram, especially with some of the more powerful stuff. Oxides and carbonates are different, so you can look at cobalt carbonate and cobalt oxide. and same thing with copper carbonate and copper oxide, you're going to use about half the copper oxide as you would than copper carbonate. And so you may find yourself down here chopping eighths. So anyway, we're going to add that onto our batch because we're using all 2 grams, and mix it up and see what happens. Okay. So before I pour this in here, I'm going to look at the last number that's on here, which is 500424, and I'm going to write that on here, 500424, and I'm going to cross this one out, just put a simple line through it so I can still read it, but so that I know that the glaze that's in here is the one with the iron and the iron filings. So that lets me know where my original was, that I went through all 4 with this, and that I've got a different glaze in there than the original. Okay, I'm going to stop right there because my front doorbell is ringing, and I'll be back. Okay, so you heard the front doorbell ring. And now I'm sitting here going, geez, where was I? Well, I have a pretty good idea because we've mixed all this and we've done all of our tests. Except for the last one with the iron filings in it. Okay? So we're going to take our last test tile here and write 0504 05 04 24 and dip that in there. 2, 4, 5. Give it a second little dip. Okay, so there you go. Basically, that's working in a glaze lab. That's what it looks like. It's just that simple. And so if you've been intimidated by it in the past, now you know what it's like. It's not that big of a deal. I'm going to write my number on the lid here. Put my lid on my stuff. Then I can save this for later. This will go in my little file, and once I get my results out, I'll save it. One of the things I do with these is very often is I take them all when they're all dead and I don't want to work with them anymore, and I put them in a big pot. And I keep adding to it. It's called hash glaze, at least it was in high school, and it's it can be a real handy glaze, like you're glazing the inside of sculptures, or you really like it. And unfortunately, if you really like it, you can never get there again. It is what it is for a while. It is, and these lids are kind of tight. You got to get them on there. And so I will fire these. I have a kiln load going in tomorrow, and I will fire these test tiles, and we'll see what they look like in a couple of days, and then I'll publish this video. So it'll only be a couple of seconds for you guys. If this has been helpful, please like and subscribe, and leave a comment. Love comments, like hearing from people out there, and I appreciate your support. And here's mud in your eye.